Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon or good morning. Welcome to our live Q&A session. We're so happy, actually happy to have sort of a small group today so that we can have more opportunity to answer your questions and maybe even get to know each other a little bit. My name is Patricia Julianell. I'm the Senior Director for Program Advancement and Legal Affairs at Schoolhouse Connection. And my wonderful colleague Karen is here also. Karen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Rice. I am the Senior Program Manager of Education Initiatives here at Schoolhouse, and I am happy to be with you all today.
So hopefully when you registered for this session, you noticed that it is a Q&A session. We don't have a PowerPoint for you. We don't have a lot of slides to go through. We did want to spend just about 10 seconds letting you know who Schoolhouse Connection is. Obviously, if you're here, you have some idea who we are, but we are a national nonprofit organization working to overcome homelessness through education. If you haven't spent a lot of time on our website, I would urge you to do that. We have lots of free resources that cover all of the different rights and services available for children and youth experiencing homelessness from early childhood all the way up through higher education. We have a Q&A from our inbox section, which is basically just an FAQ, except they're actual real questions that we have received from folks like yourselves. We take away any identifying information and put those up on the website. And we also have a scholarship program. Our deadline for this year actually just passed a few weeks ago, but we'll be reopening that in June of 2023 and closing it in November of 2023. So for students you may be working with who are juniors in high school now and will be seniors next year, they'll be eligible to take a look at that. So just a few things to kind of point out to you before we get started. As I mentioned, this is a Q&A session. We've got about 18 people, not counting Karen and myself. So I think what I would like to do is very shortly here is I will stop sharing this PowerPoint and just open up the screen so that we can all take a look at each other and maybe even spend, everyone can spend 15 seconds doing a very quick introduction just so that we know who we are. And then we're going to dive into your questions. We thought just to kind of organize things a little bit that we would divide our questions up into some big categories. We want to answer all of your questions. We really don't care what your question is about. That's what we're here for. But just to organize ourselves a little bit, what we would like to do is, we'll open the floor first for questions about eligibility and identification. Then we'll move into any questions you might have about best interest determination, school of origin, and transportation. Then we'll do immediate enrollment, then early childhood, then unaccompanied youth, then disputes, and then barriers and everything else that you might want to have a question about. So we'll just run through those categories and be quiet and listen to your questions and do our very best to try to answer them. So with that, I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen because I think for those of you who may have been able to make it to the NACCE conference last week, I think it was a good reminder, at least for me, of how wonderful it is to be able to network and actually talk to other humans and get to know other people who are going through some of the same challenges that you might be going through. So what I'd like to do is just create the opportunity for you to just say your name, maybe your role, your professional role, and what school district or charter school or community agency you might be from, just really briefly, so we don't want to take up too much time, but I think it's worth creating that space for each other. And to avoid the Zoom chaos, I'm just going to call on people in the order in which you appear on my screen. And if you'd rather not introduce yourself, just be quiet, and the awkward silence will force me to go on to the next person. So that's fine too. But I'm going to start with Amy Riccio.
Hi, my name is Amy Riccio. I am the homeless liaison for Moorhead Public Schools in Moorhead, Minnesota.
Thank you, Amy. Nicole Herbergs?
Yes, exactly. My name's Nicole Herbergs, and I am working in Kansas City School District in Ohio, and I'm an administrator in federal programs assigned to homeless services.
Awesome. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank
Heidi
you.
Rhaegar.
Hi there, I'm Heidi Rhaegar, and I work for the Ohio Virtual Academy. So we are an online charter school here in Ohio, and I work with all of our vulnerable populations, which includes, of course, homeless, but foster, military, migrant, and some of our ELL students as well. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. Welcome, Heidi. Stephanie Collinsworth.
Good afternoon, or at least it's afternoon in my neck of the woods. I am a regional homeless liaison for the Ohio Valley Educational Service Center, and I'm happy to be a part of today's conversation.
Thanks, Stephanie. Ohio is making quite a showing on our webinar today. Joanne McCowan.
Hi, I am located in Indiana. I work with the East Central Educational Opportunity Center. Basically, we're one of 9 service centers in the state, and we right now work on a McKinney-Vento grant for the Indiana Department of Ed, working with a group of consortium schools that have had very low identification numbers for a couple of years now, some of them as low as 0. So that's my role in this.
Terrific. Thanks, Joanne. Welcome. How about Kim Humphrey?
Hey everyone, I'm actually from Ohio, but I currently live in South Carolina, so maybe I'm dual representing, but I'm actually with the Department of Education for South Carolina, and I'm technically the point of contact for foster care, but I help and assist with McKinney-Vento as well. So I'm new to this role about 2 months now, so I'm excited to be here and to learn from each other.
Terrific. Welcome, Kim. Tonya Steele?
Hi, also from Ohio. So yeah, we are representing. I am a Family and Community Partnership Liaison at Muskingum Valley Educational Service Center. So we cover 7 counties and multiple districts. And my focus is on vulnerable students with a little slant towards students experiencing homelessness. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Tonya. Trisha Viglione.
Hi, Trisha Viglione. I'm the homeless liaison, Penargil Area School District, which is in, not Ohio, in Pennsylvania.
Very good. Thanks. Welcome, Trisha. Emily Teeter?
Hi, I'm with the Iowa Department of Education as the State Homeless Coordinator.
Oh, cool. Welcome, Emily. Lisa Larson. All righty, no worries. I will skip over Lisa. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, please go ahead and do that. How about Christy Walker?
Hi, I'm Christy Walker. I work for Sweet Home Oregon School District, and I am the McKinney-Vento liaison, foster care point of contact. I also work with pregnant and parenting teens and the vulnerable populations.
Thanks. Good morning, Christy. Welcome. Sharon Mouzon? Okay, Sharon, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you like. Verdi Sadbury.
Hi, I'm Verdi Sadbury from Duncanville, Texas, and I am the new McKinney-Vento officer. And I've been in the job about maybe 3 months.
Wow, okay, welcome.
Thank you.
Yolanda Zavala.
Hi, my name is Yolanda Zavala. I'm the community liaison for the Silver Falls School District here in Oregon. I've been doing this for about a year now, but I'm also the point of contact for foster care and a migrant recruiter.
Great, lots on your plate, like many of us. Thanks, Yolanda. Brittany Roy.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I guess this afternoon on this end. I'm Brittany Roy. I go by Dee. I am the Director of Educational Policy and Program Integrity for the Arizona Department of Education. So one of the program areas I have the honor of overseeing is the homeless education program for the state.
Thanks, Brittany, and welcome. Liza Valles, are you there?
Yes, hello, good afternoon. My name is Liza, and I'm a case manager for the Upland Unified School District in California.
Cool, welcome. Norma Chavez. Oh, I think actually Norma's audio might not be connected. Feel free to introduce yourself, Norma, if you like. Vasiana has also introduced herself in the chat, so you can find out about her in the chat from Connecticut. And I think the last person here is Heather Elisafan. I'm sure I messed that up. I apologize. Okay, Heather, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you wish. So that is everyone. I'm so excited to see you all here and that we have such a nice group today. So let's jump into your questions. That's what we're here for. Karen and I are going to alternate here and do our best to answer the questions that you have. And again, just to kind of organize us a little bit, let's just start with the category of eligibility for McKinney-Vento services, that definition of homelessness we see in McKinney-Vento or even in other programs, and identifying McKinney-Vento students. Any questions on those topics to start with? Okay, that is not our burning issue today. Very fine. Let's move on to our second topic. Any questions on best interest determinations, how you make those decisions, school of origin, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and transportation, whether the legal requirements for transportation or any best practices around actually setting that up. Any questions on those topics? Karen, I think we're going to have our work cut out for us when we get to that other category at the end. I think that's where they're all going to come. Okay, next topic.
I actually have a quick, yeah. We're actually going to have our McKinney-Vento summit with our liaisons next week. And we're going to do kind of like a where they kind of brainstorm ideas for transportation. And at least with my knowledge of South Carolina, I don't think we have any, or at least I would say solid best practices with transportation. And so I was wondering if anyone on the call today or yourselves could give, I guess, some good starting points for that, and so we can help facilitate that conversation well.
Well, I know we, Karen put together a document on this that I can pop in the chat for you. And we also pulled together kind of a mini focus group of liaisons about maybe 6 weeks ago and pulled the best ideas we could think of into that document. But I would love to open the floor to anyone on this call who wants to talk about any strategies that you've been using on transportation this year, because I know it's been more challenging than ever.
I'm interested to see the list you're referencing. I know here in Indiana, there's a couple of schools that actually contracted with some private firms and pay them directly to transport students. And then at the conference, I'd never heard of this idea, but at one school district, I can't remember the name of it, you guys may have this on your listing, talked about how they have some teachers that live in other school districts, and they reimburse those teachers for being willing to transport a McKinney-Vento student to and from school as they come to and from work, which I hadn't thought of that one. I don't know if we could get any takers in our state, but it's an interesting idea.
That is interesting. I did put that link in the chat. Karen, since you put that document together, were there any maybe one or two strategies that really jumped to your attention that you thought were innovative and interesting?
You know, I don't know that we have anything that solves the transportation crisis, but one thing I will say is that I have heard a lot from people recently that they have struggled with students that are within their walk zone. As transportation has become harder for districts, walk zones have gotten bigger. And so actually one particular district in Ohio, since we have an Ohio representation, they were having a really big challenge with some of their immigrant students who lived in that kind of outer area of the walk zone, which was 2 miles for them. And they used their ARP-HCY funds to purchase bikes for those students. And we're tracking their data to see if that improved their attendance. And they have a large number of students just in general that ride their bikes to school. So it was kind of just a natural way to fit their students in. And so they used their funds and purchased bikes and helmets for students, and saw an increase in attendance based on having those options. So it was an easier way to get to school than walking 2 miles. So I thought that was actually really creative. I hadn't heard of anyone else doing that. And then someone else suggested in the focus group that Patricia mentioned, doing like a walking school bus, which I know after that meeting, several others reached out and said, well, we started doing this because we thought it was such an easy solution. Again, students within that walk zone who might be younger and parents don't feel comfortable just, walk to school and get there and figure it out, that they had either a staff member, I think in a couple cases it's paraeducators, and other parents that they've worked with that kind of for lack of a better word, manage those walking school buses. And so it's an adult that meets the group of kids in the neighborhood and walks with the kids to school, so that it's another way for parents to feel comfortable with their kids within that walk zone. I have not heard that whether or not they've seen increases in attendance with those, but thought that was a really great idea, as I know, like I said, the walk zone thing, they've become bigger as transportation has been harder, and it's been a struggle to get students to school that way.
Those are a couple that I liked too, also from that list. And another one that Joanne's comment reminded me of, or at least two districts that we talked to, one in Alaska and one in Colorado, were offering McKinney-Vento families additional funds. So, you know, they were providing gas vouchers to their McKinney-Vento families to drive to and from school. That's pretty common. But they were also offering some families additional funds if they would drive another family to school with them. So if they happen to be at the same shelter or living in an apartment complex that was close by, kind of like what Joanne was saying about teachers. But you know, not so much, I wouldn't call it arranging a carpool as much as I would say saying, hey, Miss Julianelle, meet Miss Rice. You guys live near each other. Have a conversation amongst yourselves about whether you might want to drive together. And if so, we can give Miss Rice a little extra gas money for doing that. And they said that, you know, seems to be working pretty well. You know, the trick is if, you know, Miss Rice doesn't take her kids to school that particular day, then my kids are just kind of stuck. But it's, you know, better than nothing, I guess. Any other ideas anybody wants to share? Oh yeah, go Karen, yeah.
I was just going to say one other idea. In the community where I live, the district partners with the Boys and Girls Clubs, who has access to vehicles. We have a very active Boys and Girls Club in our community. And so they have multiple vans, multiple small buses. And so the district pays the Boys and Girls Clubs. Since they background check their drivers and everything to do the transportation for Boys and Girls Clubs. So the district pays the Boys and Girls Clubs for the use of their vehicles and for the driver's time. And then they pick up students and take them to school. So that was another idea. Just really using those community partnerships that have access to the vehicles and the drivers.
That's a great idea as well for the extracurricular activities. And I think kind of also just those helping to facilitate relationships is good for extracurricular. I mean, even when I was a kid, I didn't have a car. So what did I do to get to tennis and home from tennis practice after school? I rode with other students, you know, which was easy for me because I was in the same school for 4 years. I knew everybody, but helping make those connections, I think can help students get to and from extracurriculars, but also help build those peer relationships and just make students feel part of the school. And, you know, as great as it is to get a taxi home from practice, if that's the only way you can get home, you know, nobody wants to be that one kid who's like, yeah, that taxi's for me, and sort of feels weird after practice either.
Yeah, Heather mentioned extracurriculars in the chat and having not having drivers always willing to drive. And I think, you know, a misconception, I think when I was a liaison in a district, a misconception that we had was that it had to be school buses taking students home at the end of extracurricular activities. And so I would say there's a lot of creative ways to try to figure out that extracurricular transportation outside of school buses. Like Patricia mentioned, you know, kind of arranging those carpools and arranging, like, the coach is a great way to help students connect to other students. You know, I'm looking for a ride for so-and-so. Do you know anybody on your team that might be willing to do that? And kind of help bridging some of those connections. Again, kind of those informal agreements. So it doesn't have to be a bus, or it doesn't have to be, you know, a bus driver or even a cab. It can be just kind of working that out informally between other students or other parents who might be transporting, you know, similarly to the same location, that an arrangement can be made.
And it was a while ago, I can't remember the exact year, I'm pretty sure it was 2018, might have been 2017, when the Department of Ed officially put out their guidance stating that if the lack of transportation is a barrier to a student being able to participate in an extracurricular activity, that the school district or charter school has to eliminate that barrier. So I think schools were just kind of starting to figure that out, and then the pandemic started, and so now we're back sort of to square one with that. Any other questions or comments on the whole best interest school of origin transportation topic? Okay, how about immediate enrollment? Does anybody have questions about getting our students in a classroom immediately without their documents, without their parents, without all that good stuff that is typically required for enrollment and attendance.
I have a question about enrollment. So in the state of Minnesota, we have something called a 15-day drop. So if you don't come to school for 15 days in a row, for whatever reason, it doesn't matter, you're exited. And when I started in this position 3 years ago, I said, wait a minute, I'm concerned about, my homeless and unaccompanied students. And they said, no, it doesn't matter. The state says that they must be dropped. It's a funding issue. So what happens is they drop them and then they have to re-enroll, which you can re-enroll online or, you can call. Okay, many of my families don't have access to do that, or it takes them longer to do that. So I'm just wondering about, is this something I need to address? Do I just continue to try to re-enroll families? Is there any legislation around this? Like if their absence is because of their homelessness, they can't do it?
Karen, do you want to start on that one or you want me to?
I can start. So I would say first and foremost, you're absolutely right. So McKinney-Vento says that if the absences are related to their homeless status, that they cannot be held against the student. So I think really digging into the why students are absent will be really important in this case. Thinking about what are those barriers that we can remove to help students get there if there's something like transportation that's affecting attendance. But yeah, absolutely. It's making sure that it's not because they're highly mobile and they're moving around, they can't get to school. Those should not be held against a student.
While you were talking, Karen, I popped the actual exact language from the law into the chat because I know sometimes that helps, where it specifically talks about absences. So yeah, your instinct was 100% right, Amy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Another question came in the chat also. I guess this one's my turn. Does immediate enrollment under McKinney-Vento apply to students that just came from Mexico and are missing some immunizations or vaccines? So this is a great question. The answer is yes. Immediate enrollment applies to any McKinney-Vento student who's eligible for public education, and anyone coming from any country into the United States who's physically present in the United States, they're eligible for public education here. So your students coming in from Mexico or your Ukraine or Afghanistan or wherever they might be coming in from, if they are McKinney-Vento students, they would have the right to immediate enrollment, and that includes immediate enrollment without any of the documents typically required. So the law specifically talks about proof of residency and specifically talks about immunization and other health records. So you get those students into school immediately, and then there would be a process for helping them to either get their immunization records. The Mexican consulates are actually pretty good at being able to track down immunization records from Mexico. So that might be a good first stop if the family doesn't have those, or if they don't have someone still in Mexico who maybe can get a hold of those and take a picture and text it up to wherever they are. But the consulate might be able to help. And some students might actually need immunizations. And so then it would just be connecting them with immunization clinics or services in the community. One thing to keep in mind is that particularly in Latin America, the immunization rates of Latin American countries tend to be as high as or higher than those in the United States. So I think a lot of people maybe have a little bit of a stereotypical view of, oh no, if they're coming from Honduras or Mexico or Peru, they probably have never been vaccinated. But if you look at World Health Organization statistics, a lot of those countries actually have higher vaccination rates than we do in the US. So, a lot of times you might run into a nurse or an administrator who says, no way, we definitely can't let that student in, from Mexico. So giving them that piece of information might help them feel a little bit more comfortable, even though kind of regardless of how they feel, they still have to enroll the student in school. Let's see, I see Liza, your hand's up. Do you want to go next?
Yes, I also had a similar question regarding like a migrant student. I have a family who has guardianship of her goddaughter who just came from Mexico. And I was just wondering, is that student considered unaccompanied or no, because she's not in the physical custody of her biological parents, but she's in the custody of her godmother who has, I think, temporary guardianship?
Karen, I think it's your turn.
So in that case, I would say if there's, if there's been some kind of court placement or guardianship given to the student would not be considered unaccompanied. You could still look at the student's living situation to see if the student is in a situation that would be eligible for McKinney-Vento. But when there's kind of that court-ordered custody placement guardianship, that is not an unaccompanied
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I do want to say I dropped in the chat while Patricia was talking. We recently released a document. Well, actually, I think it was over the summer, so not as recent as is in my head. But it's a document on strategies for supporting immigrant and migrant students. And so I dropped that link in the chat just as a resource in case that's helpful.
Awesome. We have another question in the chat from Heidi. It's my turn. When we enroll without a birth certificate or maybe without other required documents, and as I mentioned, you enroll immediately and then you try to track down those documents. But what happens if over a period of time, you're just unable to track down those documents? And sometimes there might be a safety issue because without a birth certificate, you might be unsure if the person who enrolled the student actually is a legal guardian or not. And then also your file is sort of out of compliance for not having those documents. So under McKinney-Vento, that immediate enrollment requirement applies, and there really is no time limit or time period after which, okay, if we don't get that birth certificate in 30 days, we're going to disenroll that student. That would be considered a barrier to retention in school for that child. And I put that barrier language up in the chat a little bit earlier. So the student does need to stay enrolled. What I have found with some of these document issues is, sometimes it actually is a safety issue. Sometimes somebody might enroll a student and they are being trafficked or they have been kidnapped. I don't think that happens very often, but I have had that experience where that has happened. And the great thing is the child is in school, so there are professionals who are looking out for that child, kind of getting that feeling of something doesn't feel right here, and being able to follow up and sometimes even call the police and say, we think that there's something going on here. Whereas if we disenroll them and just send them back home with that trafficker, they're really in trouble then. So in terms of safety issues, it's really always going to be best to keep them in school. And just try to track down those documents. I know sometimes birth certificates, particularly from foreign countries, can be trouble to get. Even within the United States, that can be a problem getting those. They can take some time. Somebody was telling me the other day they were trying to get a birth certificate from North Carolina, and they were told it was going to take 12 months to get a copy of a birth certificate. So we know these problems happen, but yeah, it is important to keep the children in school. And if you're worried about a compliance issue or maybe getting audited, there's nothing wrong with putting a note in the file or even a piece of paper in the file that just says McKinney-Vento eligible. We've taken the following 3 to 5 steps to try to get the documents. We're going to keep trying, but in the meantime, McKinney-Vento requires us to keep the child enrolled, and just put that note in the file. And then if anything comes up, people can see that at least you're working on it. It isn't just sort of a random child that somebody just dropped the ball on. Okay, more questions are coming in. This one sounds familiar, Karen, to an issue that you've been working on lately. I'm dealing with my enrollment secretaries delaying enrollment of unaccompanied youth. With middle and high school age kids, the students usually enroll themselves and give the caregiver access to school records. But with younger kids, they're really confused about who to put on the student record and whether that person can have access to student records. So this one is a little bit complicated. Do you want to start it or do you want me to start it?
I can definitely start.
Okay.
So I would say first and foremost, I think it's always a great idea to go back and do some additional training with enrollment staff. I think, it's hard when the law requires that we train all staff at least annually. And so we do that annual training. And I think in my experience, as the course of the year goes on, it's in their head, but not really, not good because they're maybe not interacting with it every day. So any opportunity to go back and do some additional training, I think, is a great idea. This is what we're required to do. These are the processes that we have to follow. And just make sure that still kind of give that refresher and make sure that the requirement for enrolling students is just in their head and is not something that they've kind of forgotten that requirement. But I would say, as far as enrolling the younger children, I think, again, asking for who that caregiver is, who they're staying with, and making sure that you've got that person listed as in the district that I was a liaison in, we called it an educational guardian. So a caregiver, an educational guardian, somebody willing to take educational responsibility for that child, like calling in attendance, things like that. But you can include the parent information if you have it. If there's nothing saying that the parents don't have legal guardianship or have had that taken away from them, and still want to have access to those records, then you can absolutely still include that parent information. Again, sometimes in student information systems, you can include a note maybe that says reach out to this caregiver or this educational guardian first, or have them listed as a primary contact. But as long as there's nothing legal that parents have been removed from having guardianship, then they can still be included as well. So they can still kind of be listed as that in that student information system. And so I don't know if that helps with enrollment, but sometimes I think knowing that, okay, that the legal guardian, the biological parent is still listed, even if the student is not staying with them, maybe helps make that process a little smoother.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I did just pop in the chat a link to a brief that we have about the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, and how it applies to unaccompanied youth in particular, as well as other McKinney-Vento students. That'll help give you kind of the legal citations and some of the specifics around the information that Karen just provided, so you can look that up. Yeah, because that is also definitely a really important issue. Let's see, it's my turn now. So following up on the previous question about a student from a foreign country, sometimes the guardian has no legal document from the US and the family might just have a notarized letter. Would the student still be considered an unaccompanied youth? So anytime a youth is living in a McKinney-Vento situation, so they might be sharing the housing of others because of loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, they might be in a shelter or a motel or a car or wherever, any youth who's in a homeless situation like that and is not in the physical custody of a parent or a legal guardian, they are going to meet the unaccompanied youth definition, regardless of where they're from, or what their sort of detailed story is of how they became separated from their parents. If they are separated from their parents or legal guardian, then they would be considered unaccompanied. So a notarized letter or like a power of attorney, that will provide that adult with some rights, but it doesn't make them a legal guardian. So they would still be considered an unaccompanied youth. Which just means that when you're enrolling them in school, you're going to be able to enroll them right away. They can enroll themselves if you like, but like Karen was saying, if they are with a caregiver, you might want to add that caregiver on as a contact, depending on the circumstances of those caregivers. I know a lot of the young people who come to the US on their own from Central America and through Mexico often are placed with sponsors by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And sometimes those sponsors might be an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or a brother or sister, and they might get along great. But more often than not, those sponsors are very, very distant relatives, or sometimes people that the child maybe has never even met before. And those situations tend to fall apart really quickly. Sometimes they're actually trafficking situations. So the presence of that sponsor wouldn't change the question at all about, is this an unaccompanied youth or not? They're not a legal guardian. So that student would be an unaccompanied youth. And that kind of connects to this next question. Karen, we get a lot of letters from parents giving custody over to another person, sometimes even notarized. What does that mean? Is that considered that the parent has made arrangements for the child to stay with others? So maybe they're not actually considered a homeless or unaccompanied youth? Or what do you think is the impact of a youth coming into school with some kind of a letter, or an adult coming into school with some kind of a letter from a parent saying, look, I have this letter. So, is that an unaccompanied homeless youth or not?
So I would say, again, in that situation, it's not giving any kind of legal guardianship to that person. So in that case, I would say you'd really want to go back and look at that arrangement. Was it kind of like, I have to leave town and I'm scribbling this note quickly and my child is staying here indefinitely. We have no plan. This is just because they had nowhere else to go. Or was it a very intentional, I'm moving out of state for work. Patricia's going to live with her aunt for the remainder of the school year until she moves to be with me. And was there that actual planned out arrangement to really know, whether or not that is an unaccompanied homeless situation? When I was the state coordinator, one of the questions I got frequently was kind of that difference between being an unaccompanied youth and an unaccompanied homeless youth. And so just kind of for clarification of what I just said, in the case of, there's that planned arrangement, Patricia's parents are moving out of state for work. There's an arrangement to stay with an aunt until the end of the school year. In that case, Patricia would be unaccompanied because she's not under the custody of her parent or legal guardian. But she's not in a homeless situation. She's got, a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence and that planned arrangement that was made out by all parties ahead of time. So it's really looking at not necessarily, what does the letter say? It's what was the plan? What was the arrangement that was made? What's the plan moving forward? And then looking at, does that child or youth have a place to sleep? What is their actual living situation?
Agreed, 100%.
What is the reason for the placement? Let's say, we've had a situation where the kids lived with the dad lost his job, and then other things kind of fell apart with the family, but the children were placed with someone else because it was loss of housing. They had nowhere else to go. So the parent placed them there. The child was 15, 16 years old. Is that a homeless unaccompanied youth or not?
So when you say placed, are you talking about is there any kind of court placement, or it's just dad is saying there's nowhere else to go, I need you to go stay with grandma and grandpa or aunt and uncle or something? In that case, I would say it absolutely, there was that loss of housing. They're in a doubled up situation. They have nowhere else to go. There was not kind of that planned arrangement ahead of time of, this is why we're doing this. This is the plan moving forward. And so I would say absolutely that would be a situation to identify under McKinney-Vento.
Totally agree. I actually popped some language from the law also in the chat that just kind of puts a footing under exactly what Karen just said. Liza, looks like you have your hand raised again.
Yes, I wanted to ask, so when these migrant students are coming from other countries and staying with sponsors, because we use Aries here in Upland. I don't know what other student information systems are out there. I know there's Power School and other things like that. But when they come, so they would be considered unaccompanied youth, correct?
Yes, for the most part, they would. That word sponsor, the whole immigration system uses words in strange ways that don't really necessarily make sense. So, for example, the word sponsor, there is a program, for example, for individuals coming from the Ukraine, where people in the United States sponsor them. And I think actually the word under the immigration law is supporter, but everybody keeps calling them sponsors. And these sponsors actually sign a paper saying, I will provide for this family financially for as long as they're in the United States, and I'll pay their rent and I'll pay everything they need. In that situation, that probably is going to start to look like a pretty stable living situation for that family pretty quickly, because this other host family, the sponsor family, actually does have the legal obligation to pay for them, to pay their rent and to pay their expenses. So in that situation, when they first get here, I'm sure things are going to be unstable and they might not have a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence when they first arrive in the US. But given the legal responsibility of those sponsors, they're going to have a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence pretty quickly. Most of the time, though, when we hear the word sponsor, it does not mean that, because that's a really special program for people from Ukraine right now because of the war. Most of the time when we hear the word sponsor, it's really just a very informal arrangement where the Office of Refugee Resettlement basically just says, oh, you're from the same general part of Mexico as this youth is, and you sort of know of the family because you used to know each other 20 years ago, and here this youth is going to come live with you. And oftentimes, like I said, it can be very, very unstable. Sometimes it's a trafficking arrangement. Those situations tend to fall apart really quickly. So for those situations, I would absolutely say yes. If you're having a youth placed with that in that kind of a living situation, that absolutely would qualify as an unaccompanied youth. And that's the most common for youth who are coming to the United States alone, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So I love that we have jumped onto all different topics. I think that's great. I mean, we kind of went through all the topics I wanted to go through anyway, because unaccompanied youth was in there. We did that. Barriers were in there. We did that. So any questions that you have on any topic, disputes, early childhood, immigration, we're here for you. What do you have for us?
I have a question. I have actually a scenario for you. So I have a 12-year-old child who was brought from San Antonio, Texas to Moorhead, Minnesota. They came last summer. They were dropped off with a family member, a half sibling, and has since been bounced around to 2 other friends or family members. And they did enroll the child in school. We enrolled them. We don't have any documents, but that's besides the point. We are educating and going to work with him. I'm thinking he is homeless, unaccompanied, but I'm not sure what to do because we're starting to have some concerns, like there's some behaviors going on, some mental health concerns, some learning concerns. And I don't know, like I've done some research and I did find his mom's phone number in a really roundabout way. She claims that she never gave these people permission to enroll him in school. She's going to come and get him. She has said this for the last 2 months that she's coming. She has never shown up. We've left him in school. But my question is one, how do we get him the help he needs? And 2, at what age am I like required or supposed to file anything with the county, like social services at all? Because what we're told by the people that he's been staying with is that he was sent here because they're trying to avoid a social service situation in Texas. So part of me is like, is this child missing? Like, I don't know what to do.
So I would say, just kind of as a blanket statement, homelessness in and of itself is not a reason to make a CPS report.
Right.
But if you're concerned about abuse or neglect with a student, and it sounds like there's a lot going on, so maybe there are those concerns, then absolutely it doesn't hurt to make that report. Of course, as a mandated reporter, if you are concerned about that, you need to. But just to have that kind of on file is, that at least then it's on someone else's radar as well. And that's, I will say, and I live in Wisconsin and I worked in a school district in Wisconsin, and we were always told, like, you can call CPS, you can call, but they're going to screen it all out. That's
Right.
fine. But my theory behind that was always, okay, but then somebody else knows about it besides just me. And, if there is more going on, or, if somebody else lets them know that there's also a concern, you're kind of beginning to just build it into their awareness. And so documenting that and following your mandated reporting requirements are important. And so if it was just kind of that living situation in general, I would say that's not a reason to make a report. But it sounds like there might be more going on that would maybe warrant a report if there's that abuse or neglect concern. So
yeah, he's not like, if he was sick, he was not able to go to the doctor because nobody will pay the bill or see him. And I'm like, can he sign his own permissions to do this? Or I'm not sure where to go with that, because like he needs some mental health therapy, and he's 12. Like, I don't know if he can sign that so the releases and those kind of things.
Patricia, you're on mute.
Sorry,
I
can
you'd weigh in
provide
on
some
this.
information there. Yeah, although I don't think that this is going to be helpful to you given his age. But I put in the chat a link about special education decision making for unaccompanied homeless youth. I think that will help. I mean, you can definitely, there are procedures in place to get someone in a place where they can make decisions for him, for like an evaluation, for an IEP, for that sort of thing. In terms of just accessing medical care or mental health care out in the community, I just put another link where we have some state by state laws for when minors can consent on their own for different kinds of basically routine healthcare. And I'm just actually gonna look. So Minnesota does have a law, and I don't see a minimum age on it. Some states have minimum ages of 16, 15, 14. That's why when you said 12, I was like, ooh. But I don't see a minimum age on your state law in Minnesota. So he actually probably could consent on his own to access. In Minnesota, it says medical, dental, mental, and other health services. Obviously, for a 12-year-old, I would suspect that you're going to want some kind of adult helping him through that process. Those are pretty heavy duty decisions for a 12-year-old to make. So maybe a school counselor, a social worker, a school nurse who could sit him down and explain, here's what this is about. We think it might help you. What do you think? And just kind of help him, because yeah, he's awfully young to be managing that on his own. Or I would say one of the people he's staying with, but it sounds like he's bouncing around so much that I don't know what those relationships are like either.
Okay.
If there's
That helps.
another, I'm sorry, Amy.
I was just wondering if, with all of those things, can he receive food stamps himself as well?
Yes, and we have some information on that too. So even though he's 12, this is the first time I've talked about this with such a young child, but the USDA has defined what a household is for food stamps or SNAP benefits. I mean, people who purchase and prepare food together. So even though he's 12, if he is getting his own food and making his own food and eating on his own, which lots of 12-year-olds do, get up and make their breakfast, go to school, eat at school, make himself a sandwich at night. If he's getting that food and preparing it himself, then he would be his own household. He would be a household for one. Now, I'll tell you that whoever is down there at the SNAP office is not going to like this. So I can provide you with I'll provide you a link in the chat with the USDA memo that says this. The other option would be if any of the families he's staying with, if they are purchasing food for him and preparing food for him, even if it's not every day, if he's bouncing around, but at least a couple of days a week, he's at your house and you do cook and prepare food for him, you could put him on your SNAP case. So that would mean that one of these families might be able to get some additional income, which might even help stabilize one of his living situations a little bit. So let me grab that link for you and put it in the chat. And you all can feel free to continue talking amongst yourselves while I do that.
The other thing I was going to mention is, because it sounds like he's bouncing around a lot, even if there's another trusted adult, whether that's a school staff person or someone else in the community to help walk through, it doesn't have to necessarily be one of the people he's staying with, to walk through kind of some of the accessing that mental health, the healthcare. It could just be another trusted adult or you as the homeless liaison as well to do that. Heather wrote in the chat about partnering with the SRO or the school resource officer to just kind of double check on whether the student's been reported as missing. And I will put in a plug. I think, there's a lot of opportunities to partner with school resource officers. In my experience, that's typically a group that doesn't necessarily get training on McKinney-Vento. But I think there's a real opportunity that if you can be talking with your SRO about McKinney-Vento and understanding McKinney-Vento and awareness of McKinney-Vento, that they'd be a really good partner to help. Like, I have concerns about this student. I want to just work with you. It's not a law enforcement issue. I want to just be able to talk with you about it and make sure that there's not something else that I need to do as the liaison. So having that partnership and that collaborative relationship, I know it doesn't always work that way. And there's a lot of other things that are involved. But I think, if you can work with your SRO and make sure that they know and understand a little bit about McKinney-Vento, you'll be able to have some of those collaborative relationships in order to have some of the conversations that might help when it comes to situations like this.
You got us covering a lot of things with that scenario, Amy. Thanks. That was a good one. All right. Who has any other questions, again, about any topic at all? I think we've covered everything that we had on our list. So any other questions that you all would like to ask, whether of us or of your colleagues? Oh, please go ahead.
I had a question. I'm kind of late to it, so if you addressed it, I apologize. So I work in higher education at a community college here in Wyoming, and I have a couple students that are undocumented. And so one of them is wanting to go, is major in computer science. The other one is wanting to doing her prerequisites for the nursing program. And I was at an AC conference last week, and a red flag came up and I hadn't thought about this, but how you had shared, Patricia, about a student, I want to say like from Oregon or Washington, that I went to school, went and got there to be a nurse, but then they couldn't. And is because of the citizenship licensure, is that where that comes in? And do you know of any workarounds or not? It just is state by state in their licensure.
Yeah, that's a really important and complicated question. So yeah, so anyone who's undocumented, different professions have different testing requirements and different licensing requirements. And so, for example, you can be undocumented and be a lawyer, you can take the bar, you can become a lawyer, but you can't in most places be a nurse because of the licensing requirements, and that they're going to require a social security number, and they're going to require some other things that an undocumented person would not be able to meet. But at the same time, I will say that recently, during the pandemic, because there was such a need for healthcare workers and certain other industries, many states actually went in and amended their state laws to change some of those licensing requirements to make it easier for undocumented individuals to do some of those jobs because they were facing such a shortage. So I don't know about Wyoming, and I don't know state by state, but that could be something that the student could look into to see, if they're willing to move out of Wyoming, and even within Wyoming, this is, many different states have changed their laws on this. So they might want to look into that and see if nursing could still be an option for them with some of the different laws that might be in place now.
Okay, thank you.
Stephanie, I see your hand. Oops, you're muted.
Sorry. I was referred to an unaccompanied homeless youth who's actually going to be calling me in about 5 minutes. So I'm hoping to get an answer to this question for her. I was on the NCHE webinar yesterday, and they kind of answered it, but I just wanted to double check. She applied. She's been designated homeless for 2 school years now. And I think her situations, her dad's been in and out of jail. Her mom passed away. Her dad's very unstable. She's living with I think an ex-girlfriend of her father. She doesn't really have any interaction with him much. So she applied for school. And so one of the things I'm trying to work on is really coordinating conversation between homeless liaisons and counselors on how to fill out FAFSA and making sure that it gets completed. Well, she completed it not knowing really that she was considered McKinney-Vento, and she tried to put her dad's information, and she already turned it in. And so she's calling me to see what we can do about that, because though I think her dad doesn't have a lot of income, I still would like her to be designated as that, because I think there might be some further benefit as she moves along in her, post high school career. What are your thoughts on that?
Patricia, I'm going to let you weigh in on this because I do not know if FAFSA can be resubmitted, and that was my first thought, but I don't know if that's a real thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, it can be. It can be revised and resubmitted. And I wish Jillian were on the phone. Jillian Sitar is our expert on this. But my understanding, I know that it can be resubmitted, but I know that it's kind of a timing issue. And what she might want to do, if she has 1 or 2 colleges that really are the colleges of her choice, she might want to reach out directly to them. Because I know sometimes there's a timing issue where you redo the FAFSA, but your university maybe doesn't get those changes for a couple of months, and now you've already missed out on financial aid at the school you wanted to go to. So she should definitely amend her FAFSA, but she also probably should reach out to a couple of her first choices and say, hey, I submitted my FAFSA and I messed it up and I have to resubmit it. And so I want you to know that happened and it's coming. And by the way, I'm an unaccompanied homeless youth. And so I would suggest doing both of those. I'm putting a link in the chat also on our FAFSA page. We have, Jillian has created pages that are specifically designed for youth, as well as for folks who are in higher education and folks who are in K-12. And you will find, I think, some really great resources there. But I'm also going to put Jillian's email in here, where you can kind of check back in with her as well, because she is our higher education expert and guru. But I think when I've heard her talk about it, that is what I've heard her suggest. Redo that FAFSA, but also reach out to the college of your choice and let them know that what happened. Let's see. Oh, another question came in. Are we required to provide transportation from the after school, the YES program, which is an after school program, to home? Karen, if you're okay, I will send that one over to you. And while you're talking, I'm going to get the Department of Ed guidance and just pop that in the chat so people have the stuff in writing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first question would be, is this part of the student's educational program? It sounds like it's an after school, you know, if it's just kind of an after school like childcare situation, I would say that would be different than if it's like an extracurricular activity. So kind of from both perspectives, if it is like an extracurricular activity, then absolutely transportation would need to be provided. If it's an after school like childcare situation, no, in that case, I would say it would not be required, although, you know, it certainly would be worth a conversation of figuring out kind of what works best for the family, because if there's no way for the parent to come pick the child up, then maybe a different kind of arrangement needs to be made. But if it's just, like I said, a childcare situation, if it's in another school, for example, from where the student attends, then you may need to transport from one school to the after school program. And that's kind of that transportation home after school. Otherwise, I would say if it's just childcare, then no. Hopefully that answers it, but I have a lot of questions. So if you want to provide more clarification, I can certainly be more specific.
Thanks, Karen. I did put the quote from the guidance in the chat, and I'm actually going to get the link for the guidance. It's just going to take me a second to dig that link up, but we do have it on our website.
And my apologies for not giving a very firm answer on that, but sometimes there's a lot of other factors that go into it depends. It's kind of our standard answer.
The longest serving McKinney-Vento state coordinator who worked from the original act of 1987 all the way until this year when she retired. The first time I met her, she said, "Patricia, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about this job. The answer is always, it depends."
I just have a quick question about if a student has qualified as homeless under McKinney-Vento and midway in the year, they get placed into foster care. I have left them on my McKinney-Vento list. They're also on the foster care list. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, that is correct, because, you know, as you know, once a student is McKinney-Vento eligible, they should stay on your list for the whole year, even if they move into permanent housing or foster care or whatever the situation is. So, yep, I think you're doing it right.
Okay, thanks.
Well, we are just about on time. We're about 1 minute away. So I think this timing worked out perfectly. I'm so grateful to all of you for your questions. Karen and I we were definitely thinking, well, it's either going to be silence and we're just going to hang up after 10 minutes, or it's going to be a great discussion. And it turned out to be a great discussion. So thank you all for that. We appreciate it. You know how to reach us. If you have other questions, you can always drop us a note. info@schoolhouseconnection.org is probably the easiest way, but you can also reach us directly. And we are very grateful for your time and hope to see you on a future webinar soon. So thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon or morning. Bye.